Okay, so in this video, I'm going to show you how are we going to further optimize our code when using our database. Okay, so in this video, so we have here our on how are we going to use data models. Okay, so what we have so far, by the way, okay, we keep on using here the map. Okay, here again we have the map, and also here the list of maps. Okay, so what I'm going to show you is instead that we are going to use maps, we are going to use objects or classes to replace our map. Although I'm not saying that it's you're not going to use map. Okay, so you could still use your map if you want. If you are let us say, if you prefer to use map, then you can do it. But as we are going to, let us say, acclimatize yourself in using classes, it would then be easier uh, using classes compared with maps. Okay, so to create a class, by the way, is we are going to look at our uh, database. Okay, so because this we are going to base our class structure with our database. So as you can see here, we have 7 fields, okay, into our database for our contacts. By the way, I'm going to use a class here for our contacts. Okay, so we have here 7. So what we are going to do is each of these will be used into the structure of our class. Okay, so what I did here is I created actually a folder named models. Okay, and here I have 2 models. We have the contact and the users, but I'm just going to show you how are we going to have our contact. Okay, so instead that we are going to have later on, instead that we're going to have our here map and also the list of maps here, also with this one here, instead of trying to return maps, okay, list of maps, we're going to use then our class or object, which I initialize here as contact. Okay, so first is we are going to initialize or create the structure of our contact. So we have here class contact, then we have here the different fields that we have from our database. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we have here the 7 fields. Okay, although there are some tutorials that says you must have to follow whatever would be the name of the fields here. You must have to follow here, but we could also have it with our own name. Later on, I'm going to show you how instead that we are going to follow the name of the structure or the field names on the structure of the database. Okay, so we're just going to use our own names here. Now, I initialize them as late, okay, not final. Why? Because we are going to create multiple constructors, in which the very first constructor, by the way, is I'm going to show you here the complete constructor. Okay, or the first constructor is the contact, then it requires all fields. And by the way, I have here one field that is not required on my first contact or on my first constructor. Okay, what does it mean? So it is possible that when we create our contact using this first constructor, we could actually not use the address, or it is possible that we are not going to supply the address, as long as the address must be set as nullable string. Okay, but anyway, later on we're going to create another contact, so I just set all of them to be nullable. Okay, so meaning it is possible that we are not going to use name, user ID, or whatever. Okay, that is going to actually depend on the constructor. Okay, the first constructor here, I have contact, I have required fields, all are required except for the address. Okay, anyway, I'm just showing you how are we going to use a field that is not required when we are going to call or create an instance of a contact or of an object. Okay? Then we are going to use this one when we are going to, instead that we're going to pass directly our list of maps, we are going to convert the contacts here into the list of that object. Okay? So we are going to deal with multiple records, zero or many records here. Okay? So this constructor that we have now is going to instantiate. Now it is I forgot the name of this one, something derivative or whatever. Okay, it is going to create an instance every time that this constructor is called. It's going to automatically create a new instance of this object or this class. Okay, so if ever that we are going to use this constructor when we are going to call, okay, or we are going to pass the content of the contacts here, of the response, okay, so it would take time since contact is going to create an instance in every time it is being called. Okay, so what are we going to do so that every time that it is going to be called, we are not going to use or we are not going to create a new instance of this class every time it is being called, and this is going to be used only, or in most cases, for multiple records. Okay, so if ever that we are going to call this class 100 times, so we must have to see to it that it is going to create only a single instance, then it is going to return multiple contact object using the same instance, so it would be faster. So there goes the keyword factory. Okay, so we have here another constructor. I name it from JSON. Why? It is because when we are going to pass the contacts variable here, or the response, that body that has been encoded into a JSON, so it is going to be in the form of JSON. Okay, so contact that from JSON, then by default our response that body is in the form of map of string dynamic. Okay, so we are going to return a new instance or an instance of a contact, okay, using now the content of the response that body, which is in the map format. Okay, so as you could see here, I am using now the name of the fields in our database. Why? It is because these are the column names contained in our response.body. So as you can see here, our response.body will contain those names coming from our database. Okay, so that's why when we pass, okay, so when we pass it into our class, okay, so we get the value of each of the columns and assign it to our local variables or the private variables into our contact class. Okay, so that's why we are assigning it to be late, because we are going to assign values into these variables when it is being called or instantiated. Okay, so this is from JSON, and again, now take note here, I am using the keyword factory. So what does factory means? Okay, this solves the problem that I have told you a while ago, that if ever that we are going to use this constructor here and we are going to pass, let us say 100 records, okay, or we're going to create 100 contacts, okay, so it is going to create 100 new instance of this variable of this class. Okay, so that is going to affect the performance of, or the speed of our app. Okay, the performance. So what does factory do? Factory is just going to actually check if ever there is already an instance of this variable, and if there are no instance, then it is going to create one. Then if on the next call, okay, so if ever an instance already exists, it is going to create a new one, and instead it is going to use that same instance of this object. Okay, so therefore factory is going to create only one instance. It is going to create only one instance, although it is going to still create or return 100 contacts, but it is going to create only one or use only one instance of this object. Compared with this, it is going to create 100 instances, new instance of the object. So therefore, factory constructor could be faster compared with this default constructor. Okay, so by the way, I am using here a name. This is what we call as a named constructor. Okay, it returns a contact, but that if every time I'm going to delete the name, it is going to return an error, and it is going to say it is already defined. Okay, so that we could isolate or differentiate this constructor with our default, so you must have to give a name. So I'm just going to have it from JSON. Okay, so that this constructor then is going to be used every time that we are going to get records from here, from the database. Okay, pass it to the response body contained in a response body. Then we're going to call or instantiate that class. Okay, so we are now going to use that class, but before going there, we must have to change our initialization here. So first, instead that we are going to use the dynamic here, also it here. So instead of trying to use a dynamic, okay, so we are going to use a contact. Okay, and by the way, I have already here, I have imported, okay, my contacts class. Okay, so we have here list contacts for this one here. Now I'm not going to change this one here because this is for our group. Okay, so what I have only changed is the list of contacts. Okay, so next is we are going to change also this one here. Okay, instead of dynamic, we are going to have the contact. Okay, now it returns an error because our get contact still we have a list of dynamics, but it says it can't be assigned to a variable of type list of contacts. Okay, so we are going to change, go to definition. So therefore, instead that we are going to have a basic list, we are going to have a list of contact. Okay, so that when we return, where is it? Okay, so we have here the error has been removed. Okay, so next is we are going to use then the from JSON constructor so that we could pass the returned records. Okay, so later on we are going to change this one here, but now we are still going to have we're going to modify our get contacts. So as you can see, it is going to return a list of contacts. It's now not a list of dynamics. Okay, so here we have returned our, or we have retrieved the contacts. So next we are going to create or instantiate our contacts class. Okay, and again, it is possible that response body contains lots of records, many records, so therefore we're going to use the from JSON. Okay, so I'm just going to have I'm just going to create a contacts list. Okay, this is not the same with the contacts list above because I initiated or I created that as private variable with underscore in my prefix. Okay, so contacts list is equal to, now since we are going to return, later on is we are going to return our contacts list. Okay? So therefore, we must have to generate, since we are going to return here a list. Okay? So therefore, we must have to create here a list of contacts. Take note, response.body is a list of maps. Okay? So, but what we must have to return must be a list of contacts. So here, out of the response.body, we are going to generate a list. Okay? So, that generate from where? Okay? So, first is the length. So, how many items are we going to generate? So, that is going to depend on the contacts here. So, we are going to modify contacts that length. Okay. So, then we're going to look at our syntax here. Then we have a nullable callback function. Okay. So first is we are going to initialize here the index. Okay. Because if ever there will be 10 items, so the index would be from 0 to 9. Okay. And fat arrow meaning return. It is going to return something. It is going to return what? It is going to return for each of the item. It is going to return contact that from JSON. Okay? From JSON, then what it is going to return? Contacts then with the index. One, two, three. Oops. Oh, wait a bit here. Okay. It should be contacts. Okay, so as you can see, our from JSON requires a map string dynamic, and as we know, the response.body, each of the items, okay, from a response.body is represented through map string dynamic. So that is why we are going to pass each of the items there with their index, okay, into our from JSON. Okay, so contacts list now is actually, as you can see here, list of contacts. Why? It is because it is generated, it is a list generated from our contacts list. Okay, contacts list is actually the response.body, and we have created a list of contacts through the from JSON constructor of the class contact. Okay, so this is how are we going to use the from JSON constructor. Okay, so we still have then an error here. Length. Okay, so instead that we are going to use the contact, so we are going to use the returned name of the class. So instead that we're going to have contact underscore name, so we're going to use these fields, or the fields that we have initialized into our contact. Okay, so here I'm going to have, instead that we're going to have contact name, I'm going to use that contact. No, that name. Okay, so as you can see here, the argument string or nullable string can't be assigned to the parameter type string. Okay, so the solution for this one is we are going to assert an assertion keyword. Okay, we're going to assert Flutter that is not null. Okay, so next is we have that phone, then with our assertion. Okay, I guess that's all. Okay, so let us try. Reload. Okay, so actually we have the same result. Okay, but instead we use uh, what's that, map of string dynamic, we are now using here a class. Okay, a data model. Okay, what else? Okay, this one here. So instead that we are going to again a map, okay, we could still, or we could also use here our class. Okay, so I'm just going to comment it out. Then I'm going to have into our contact. So every time that we are going to create an instance of this class, we are going to, if we are going to use the default constructor, is we are going to use this one here. Okay, all. We must have to return, or we must have to provide data for all of the objects or the fields. But in this case, we need only to have the ID and the group ID. Okay, so this is the map that we used when we call or we get our contacts. Okay, although we could still use all of these, okay, and pass only the ID and the group ID, but we could also actually create here another constructor. Okay, I'm going to call it contact that. Okay, I'm just going to call it JSON data, because this would be the JSON data that we are going to use when we are going to retrieve our contacts. Okay, then I'm just going to have two required fields. Okay, so required this, that. Okay, we have the user ID and the group ID. Okay, so user ID and the group ID, semicolon. Okay, so another constructor, okay, that when we are going to call this constructor, we are going to supply only the user ID and the group ID, and we name it JSON data. So save. So here I'm going to have var JSON data. Again, I'm just going to call it JSON data because we have it here, JSON data. So equal to, we are going to call the contact that JSON data. Okay, then our user ID is actually, we have the user ID, and the group ID is, we have the selected group ID. We have an error. Okay, string and int. Why? It is because our here, our user ID is, we have an int. Okay, so therefore we must have to just remove the toString variable. Save. So still I name it JSON data. So now take note, don't be confused with the JSON data here. Let us say I'm just going to call it JSON D. Okay, so that we could differentiate the JSON data from, or just JSON maybe. Okay, save that. Okay, so that we could differentiate that this JSON data is actually a constructor into our class, and this JSON here is our variable. Okay, so save and reload. One, two, three, four, five. Oops, failed. Wait. JSON encode. Oh, where's the error? Ah. Converting object and encodable object failed instance of contact. Oh yes. Okay. So what we have created so far, by the way, is we have only returned an object. Okay. So, but here, as you can see, it should be in the form of, initially it should be in the form of a map. Okay. So while here we have our JSON here is only an object, a class. Okay. So what are we going to do now is we must have to convert this one into our map. Okay. And we could create a map here. Actually, we could create a method. Okay, let us try this. A map, then a string dynamic. Okay. I'm going to call it to JSON. Okay, and we are going to return user ID and a group ID. Okay. Undefined. Group ID. Okay. So what we are going to do is we are going to instantiate a class of a contact object, then convert it to JSON. Okay. So what we are doing here is only we are creating here an instance of the object. Okay. So we must have to call then to JSON so that we could reformat it to same as with the previous one. Okay, let us try. I hope this works. Okay, that to JSON. That to JSON. Okay, so save. So again, what we are doing here on line 165.166 is we created an instance of the object, of the contact object, then we converted it to a map. Okay, so save, let us try. Uh-oh. Okay, if ever this a BR, so this is coming from the PHP. Oh, leave it here. I think. Okay, in our parameter we have, I have misspelled by the way the group ID. So save. Let's try again. Reload. Okay, we have it there. Okay. So what we did here is only instead of this one here, so we have created to JSON method. Okay, so take note, this is a method, this is not a constructor, this is a method, so that we could use then this one here as a parameter into our when we are going to call our or we use our HTTP. Okay, so we created here an instance, then converted it to JSON, and it is this JSON variable that we have used into our as parameter into our HTTP. Okay, so we are again playing with misspelled parameters. Okay, so by the way, if ever that for your practice, you could change also our groups. Okay, our groups into you could create. In my case here, I have created actually only the users. Okay, but you could also create the group so that instead of always using then our maps, okay, a map, then here also we are using here also a map. Instead of map, we are then going to use our class. Okay, so that's how are we how are we going to use a data model with Flutter. Okay, so as a recap, so first we have created our contacts class. Okay, and the fields here are actually patterned through our database or table. So in your case, if you are going to have your group, so you're just going to have the ID and the name. Okay, so let's go back to the contacts. Then after creating our contacts in our list, we changed our initialization. But first is we are going to import our class. Then we have changed our initialization. So instead that we're going to have a dynamic here, so we're now using the contact object. Okay. Then when we retrieve our contacts, instead that we're going to use our map, so we are now using here the JSON data constructor of our class, and we have converted it to JSON. So that is why you have here this line here is going to create or instantiate the object, then we directly called to JSON, so that it's going to convert this object into JSON, or actually a map. Okay, then we use that into our HTTP object as our parameter, and when the objects or the records are returned, we generated actually a list of contacts. Okay, and we have it from JSON. Here from JSON we have actually created again a map, okay, a contact with the values from JSON. Why from JSON? It is because response.body is actually in the form of a JSON. Okay, then we return it, and it is here, contacts list view. Wait, get contacts is actually we have here. Okay, and we assign the my list with the current yes, we have assigned it to the my list, and consequently we have updated it with the content of our contacts list. And once the values of the contacts list has been changed, so automatically also here the length has been changed, so therefore it is going to rebuild our contacts list view, and here we have changed the values here. So instead that we are going to have the square brackets here, so we use now the dot notation of our class. So dot name and dot phone is actually from here, dot name and dot phone. Okay, so in your case, when you are going to have other functionalities, for example, when the user clicks on the item here, it is going to call uh, what it is going to call then. It's going to call again, or if you want to display all fields, okay, so you are then going to call all of the items here. So that name, that user ID, that phone, that email, that address, and so on. Okay. So again, you must have to practice using classes so that it would be then easier for us to manipulate the records returned from our database. Okay, so that's all for this video, and I'll see you on the next one.